Judaism is more of a family or a nation than a religion. So in other words, even if a person strays very far away from Judaism, technically they're still Jewish. A Jew, even though he has sinned, is still Jewish. Even a lapsed Jew is still Jewish. And what that means is still obligated in everything in Judaism. But Jewish he still is.
Baruchim Abim, and welcome to Torah Talks, Chazaq's program with special guests. We have with us all the way from Passaic, New Jersey, our dear friend Rabbi Mordechai Becher. Baruch haba, welcome. How are you?
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Once again at the Chazaq headquarters.
Yeah.
And we're going to be speaking about the Rabbi's famous book, Gateway to Judaism, the what, how, and why of Jewish life. But before we get to that topic, we get a little bit of background about the Rabbi and the good work, great work that the Rabbi does.
So how far back do you want to go? Like when the earth cooled or after the comet? So I've been living in Passaic now for about 25 years.
Oh, wow. So basically when you were born.
I teach at Yeshiva University full-time in the Torah department. And we have a program, JSS, which is for guys who have limited or no background in Judaism, from guys from all over the world, literally. So I teach for them. I also teach in another program at YU called IBC, Isaac Breuer College, which is for guys who have a background but want a broader curriculum than just Gemara.
Right.
Teach for them as well. I do a Chabura, small, short class once a week on Jewish philosophy for the guys in the more advanced program in the yeshiva part of the YU. And next semester I'll be teaching a course in the history department on blood libels, torturing the host, and other anti-Semitic conspiracy theories.
Wow.
A fun course, yes.
Wow. Wow. I know the Rabbi is also involved in Neve.
Yes. My wife and I are the Rabbi and Rebbitzin of the Neve alumni. So that means when women come back from Neve Yerushalayim, which is a college
Seminary.
Seminary for women in Jerusalem, and they come back to the States. So we help them out with, I try to answer their questions in Jewish law, Jewish philosophy. My wife and I try to help also with marriage, with dating, with other aspects of their lives. And I also do Shabbatonim. I speak in various locations, a whole bunch of them last year. I don't remember, Richmond, Virginia, and Overland Park, Kansas, and Baltimore, and Chicago, and all over the place.
Rabbi travels to give a shiur.
I do. And I work also for Legacy Kosher Tours in the summer, where I am historian and tour guide for Legacy Kosher Tours. We've been to about, 25 countries.
Wow.
Asia, all over Asia, China, Singapore, South Korea, Japan, India, etc. We've done Morocco, Egypt, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, Australia, Panama, etc. So that's my summer gig. What else do I do? I'm actually working on a doctorate now in history, medieval Jewish history, which takes a little time, going very slowly on that. And, I have a family, thank God. Two of my sons fought in Gaza and Lebanon over the past year. One was wounded and recovered and went back after being wounded. And so they were just here. And so it's been a bit of a rough year for all of the Jewish people, understandable. And
very impressive, Rabbi Becher.
Pretty good. That's it.
I think you just sleep in Passaic. Everything else is all over the world. Unbelievable. Kanai Baruch Hashem. Very inspiring. I actually, the Chazaq Torah Talks, I actually like the first question a lot, because it's so interesting to know a little bit background about the Rabbi. People just know, hey, Rabbi Becher just gives lectures, right? No, there's so much more to that. Baruch Hashem, as we see. So, Rabbi, if you could, everyone has in their own definition of what it means to be a Jew. What is the proper definition of being a Jew?
So the question has really I'd imagine there's two components to the question, which is technically what is a Jew is not such a difficult question. historically and according to Jewish law, a Jew has always been defined by matrilineal descent. If you look in the book of Ezra, Jews came back from Babylon to Israel after the exile to rebuild the temple. And Ezra tells a lot of the Jews that came back were fairly assimilated, not very knowledgeable. Fascinating, but they came back to Israel anyway.
Wow.
And they wanted to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Ezra told them, he says, those of you who are married to non-Jews, you've got to divorce or put aside your non-Jewish wives and children in order to participate in the building of the temple. Now, that indicates that the children too are not Jewish. Right? That's not the primary sources in the Torah itself, but the Torah itself, in the Bible, 5 books of Moses, numerous places, Torah tells us that there is an idea that the father defines the tribe. You're a Kohen, a Levi, etc. The mother defines one's Jewishness, what we call matrilineal descent. The other method of definition of a Jew is by someone converting to Judaism. And conversion also has a historical and a legal precedent for thousands of years. Generally, conversion is really a reenactment of Mount Sinai. Jews came to Sinai, accepted the Torah, had the revelation, and then we became technically Jewish. Until that time, we were descendants of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, not technically Jewish. So what happened at Sinai? We unconditionally accepted the Torah. So every convert must unconditionally accept the Torah. Secondly, the men had circumcision. And thirdly, we all purified ourselves. Technically, how you do that in the desert, I'm not going to get into, but we went through purification. So for all generations, and I'm pretty much paraphrasing Maimonides here, for all generations, every person who wants to join the Jewish people has to go through type of a mini Mount Sinai experience. Man has to be circumcised. They have to immerse in the mikveh, men and women, immerse in the mikveh, Jewish ritual bath, and purify themselves and unconditionally accept the Torah and God. And because at Sinai, the Jews did this in the presence of God and his representative, Moses, for all generations, it must be done with a authorized representatives of the Jewish people, i.e., a duly constituted Beit Din or Jewish court of 3 rabbis. Without going into the technical details, that really has been conversion. Now, there are other conditions. The person has to be sincere and so on and so forth, but really the sine qua non of conversion, the primary focus, is the acceptance of the Torah unconditionally. So that's, if you wanted to define a Jew, it would be in one of those 2 ways. Sometimes it can become confusing. We've had Jewish communities who have been out of contact with the rest of the Jewish world for thousands of years. The most famous, the Ethiopian Jews. So Jews of Ethiopia were pretty much out of contact with much of the Jewish world for a long time. The first real contact was in 16th century Egypt. A Jew there who actually, this was common at the time, remember, 16th century, slave trade. He bought a woman as a slave in Egypt, Jewish man, religious Jewish man, falls in love with her. When she eventually learns Arabic, she says she's Jewish.
Well,
he is stunned, and not only is she Jewish, says, I'm married. So this pretty much puts an end to his romantic intentions. So he asked the chief rabbi of Egypt, Reb David ben Zimra, who is known as the Rais al-Yahud. It's Arabic, means the head of the Jewish community, and prolific writer of responsa, wealthy businessman, brilliant Torah scholar, had a yeshiva. One of his students, you may have heard of, Reb Isaac Luria, the Arizal, student of the Radvaz. Radvaz wrote literally thousands of responsa. And this man asked the Radvaz. The Radvaz did some investigation. First of all, he found out that the woman's husband was dead, which was obviously bad news for her and the husband, but good news for this man. So, every story has okay, I don't mean to be callous, but that was the case. And secondly, the Radvaz said that she is indeed Jewish, and that the Ethiopian Jews are descendants of the tribe of Dan, who were exiled early on by the Assyrians, the lost 10 tribes you've heard of, most of them probably assimilated. There are scholars who maintain that some of the Afghanistan tribes are descended from the lost 10 tribes. So if some fundamentalist Muslim Taliban wakes up in his goat's hair tent in the middle of the night with a craving for gefilte fish, it is because he has Jewish genes. Ashkenazi Jewish genes, obviously. In any case, be that as it may, the Radvaz maintain that, yes, she is Jewish. I guess they married and lived happily ever after. I have no idea. But in any case, that was first raised way back then. Hundreds of years later, the state of Israel, in a very famous operation with Mossad and other agencies of the Jewish state, brought tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews who were being persecuted in Ethiopia, living in abject poverty, brought them to Israel.
Right.
There was a movie about it, not a very good movie, but called the Red Sea Diving Resort, I think, about the operation.
I thought Rabbi Vadia was involved with...
He was, yes. So when they came to Israel, Rabbi Vadia Yosef was the chief Sephardi rabbi of the state of Israel, and he, quoting Radvaz and other sources, Eldad Hadani, etc., also came to the conclusion that the Ethiopian Jews were indeed Jewish and one of the lost tribes, so to speak. There are Ashkenazi authorities, halakhic authorities, who maintain that they should go through some type of stringency conversion, so to speak, a just-in-case conversion. But on the whole, and interestingly, the Ethiopian Jews have integrated extremely well into the state of Israel, much better than many other immigrants. It's like very, very interesting in all levels. In fact, I just read that the appointed as head of the Asuta Hospital is an Ethiopian Jew, a doctor who was a military surgeon for years, very high ranking in the IDF, and he's now head of the hospital. And so in any case, so that's as far as what is a Jew. And there are no other definitions. A person might want to say, and there are movements, reform, to a lesser degree conservative, who wanted to say, well, we accept now patrilineal, this and that. But the truth is, not only are they messing with Jewish law, but they are interfering in a historical fact. Chess, the game of chess, has been played for at least 1,500 years, probably, maybe longer. Let's say I decide that chess is a contact sport. That's how my children used to play it, at least. So you decide that chess is a combat. Now you contact the International Chess Federation. You'd like to play. You're an excellent player. And you tell them, but my version of chess involves actual combat as well. Now, if they don't accept you to the Federation, that's understandable. Aside from the safety concerns, you are redefining something which has been around for thousands of years in a very definable, agreed upon form. Right. So same with Judaism. What's a Jew? Now, I understand that the question probably was not just about what is a Jew, but the question probably is, what's a good Jew? That's a little more difficult.
Take it to the next level.
And really, you could be Jewish by birth. The former Archbishop of Paris was Jewish by birth. He was brought up by Catholics. They saved his life. His parents gave him to a Catholic family during the Holocaust in France. Wow. Lustiger, I believe his name was, if I remember correctly, and he stayed Catholic, and he became Archbishop of Paris. Wow. I think he even put on film once. Some Chabadnik grabbed him and was able to do that. But now, is he a good Jew? Ultimately, that's for Hashem, God to judge, not my job. But I think someone who is a full-fledged Catholic archbishop, who is loyal to a religion other than Judaism, who believes in ideals which are contradictory to Judaism, who does not practice any of Judaism, it's hard to define such a person as a good Jew.
Right.
You might have a Jew who is a practicing Buddhist, or a Jew. But so you see, it's interesting, and this is one of the fascinating differences between Judaism and most religions. You see, this Cardinal Lustiger is 100% Jewish according to Jewish law. He has a child. Actually, he's a Catholic cardinal. That's highly unlikely. But let's say he would have a child that child he has a child with a Jewish woman, let's say, that child's Jewish.
Right.
She goes to Neve, she becomes religious, you can marry her. Excellent. Right. So he's still Jewish, because whereas, let's say, a Catholic who no longer practices Catholicism, does not take communion, doesn't confess, etc., is not Catholic. Judaism is more of a family or a nation than a religion. So in other words, even if a person strays very far away from Judaism, technically they're still Jewish. Right. As the Talmud puts it, Yisrael afapi shechata Yisrael, who a Jew, even though he has sinned, is still Jewish. Is he a good Jew? I don't think so. Right? Would I want to marry such a? No. Would I? But Jewish he still is. So even a lapsed Jew is still Jewish. And what that means is still obligated in everything in Judaism. Maimonides, in a fascinating letter to Yemen, the Jews of Yemen went through a terrible period of time where a lot of oppression by the Muslim regime. I think it was the Zaidi, I don't remember the name of the regime. And they tried to force a lot of Jews to convert to Islam. And after that period was over, these Jews contacted Maimonides for guidance. And there were rabbis in Yemen who did not want to accept those Jews back to Judaism. They said, you converted, that's it. Halas, it's over. Sure. Right? Maimonides says, absolutely not. These Jews did the wrong thing, but they absolutely have to be accepted. They are still 100% Jewish. And he says, even Yerovam ben Nevat, Jeroboam, the evil king, Shechata behichti asarabim, who sinned and caused others to sin, idolatry, murder, you name it, right, etc. Going slow in the left lane, all the most serious crimes right, you can imagine, right? Jeroboam ben Nevat, he says, even he is obligated to sit in the sukkah on Sukkot to make a blessing on food. He's still obligated in all the commandments. He's not the type of person I would want as my leader. He's not but he's still Jewish. So a good Jew, and here it's difficult to say. Again, this is really for Hashem to judge. But everyone's. As I once heard from Rabbi David Gottlieb, he put it this way. He said, "What's the difference between a hypocrite and a human?" He said, "A hypocrite states certain goals and beliefs and makes no attempt to get there. A human has certain goals and beliefs, attempts to get there, and often fails. Failing to achieve my goal, failing to get all the way, that's human. That's normal. Right? And so a Jew, we have obligations as Jews. There's obligations. We have to try to fulfill those obligations. The more of those obligations I fulfill, the greater the quality of my fulfillment. I would say the better Jew I am. But you know what? It's hard for me. We can't judge because I don't know all the pressures that a person has. They failed because of this reason, failed because of that reason. I don't know. Right? Maybe one person's potential is so great, or is and they haven't achieved that potential. They may look so much better than us, but they're so far short of their own potential. So there are two components of obligation. There are universal obligations, and then there's a unique obligation you have as an individual. And both of those combine to the attempt and the degree of success you have in fulfilling those is, I guess, the degree of you being a good person and a good Jew. So that's a little harder to define. We can define the obligations, but how far a person along is on those, difficult to know.
We leave that to God. Absolutely.
So there was, I think, an American colonel in Afghanistan who a reporter asked him, "How do you think God will judge the Taliban?" And the American soldier said, "It's not my job to know that. It's my job to arrange the meeting."
That's funny. Yeah. Rabbi, what does it mean to live a Jewish life? I know you brought out beautifully the concept of what makes a Jew, etc.
Living a Jewish life. So there are what we call the system of mitzvot. 630 commandments. Don't get worried, everyone. No one is obligated in all 613 unless you are male, female, single, married, divorced, Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, all simultaneously. Conceivably, there are people like that, but on the whole, most of us are not obligated in all 613. The Sefer HaChinuch, famous book, goes through all the commandments in Barcelona, Middle Ages. He maintains that of the 613, there are 270 which we're obligated in today, meaning when most Jews are not in Israel, we don't have the full infrastructure of Jewish law, so it's less than half. But still, the mitzvot form the framework of Jewish life.
Right.
They're not that's not all of Jewish life. Jewish life is actually more than that. There are things outside the framework of the commandments. For example, Rabbi Chaim Vital, student of Rabbi Isaac Luria that we mentioned before, student of the Radvaz. So Rabbi Chaim Vital writes in one of his books called Sharei Kedusha, The Gates of Holiness. He says that, good character traits, personality development, are not part of the formal structure of the mitzvot.
Midot.
Yeah. He says there's no formal commandment that says thou shalt not be arrogant. There is no formal commandment that says don't be a jerk.
But isn't it obvious?
So his question is, why are they not part of the commandments?
Right.
So Rabbi Chaim Vital's answer is because they are the prerequisites for the commandments.
Derech Eretz Kadma LeTorah.
Exactly, right? Kadma Derech Eretz Torah Chaf Vav Dorot. The Talmud says that basic human decency preceded the Torah by 26 generations. 10 generations from Adam to Noah, 10 from Noah to Abraham, and 6 from Abraham to Moses. And during that time, what was the development of society? What were the Jewish people and our ancestors developing? Basic decency. It says once you have basic decency, now you've got the framework of the commandments, which is built on top of that. So if you'd ask me what's the framework of Jewish life, I would say A, be a decent human being. B is you have to fulfill your obligations in terms of the commandments. The commandments I would loosely divide into 3 sections. This is based on the view of the Maharal, Rav Yehuda Lerva of Prague, 16th century philosopher, mystic, brilliant Torah scholar in Prague. In his commentary on ethics of the chapters of the fathers, I don't like that translation, Pirkei Avot. In his commentary there, he says that the commandments are divided into 3 sections, and they form really the whole framework of Judaism. What are they? Relationship with God, relationship with other people, relationship with your own soul.
Man to God, man to man, man to self.
Yeah, I prefer to use person to put, but okay. Be clear. Yeah. Right, but no, I do that deliberately because I'm sorry to say this, but I think when I used to teach rabbis training courses, and I would tell them when most rabbis get up in the pulpit and give a sermon and they talk about a Jew, they mean a man. Yep. How do I know this? They say, when a Jew puts on tefillin, well, hello, half your audience doesn't do that. Right? So in any case, it's relationship to God, relationship to other people, and relationship to yourself. In Hebrew, we say mitzvot bein adam lemakom, mitzvot bein adam lechavero, mitzvot bein adam la'atzmo. So, for example, in Pirkei Avot, it says the world stands on 3 things. Exactly. Torah, study of Torah, that's a mitzvah between the person and their own soul. Study of Torah. Avodah, worship of God, prayer, etc. That's between human and God. Gemilut chasadim, kindness to others, between myself and other people. So you can't ignore any of those. Some people are better at some than the others. Some people are better with God than with other people. There are some people who are better with themselves and with others. But Judaism obligates us to engage in all 3 and work on all of them. And during the course of a Jew's day, he or she will encounter all of those situations. And sometimes they overlap, right? They're not strict. There's no strict line in between. If I hurt another person, so you know what? They're God's child. So it's also an offense against God. I've also corrupted my own self. So it's offense against it. So they type of intermesh, right. but that's I think to live a Jewish life means to live a life permeated by a concern. And how do I know this? Can I prove this? But there's a story in the Talmud in which a Gentile, it's actually 3 Gentiles come to the 2 sages Shammai and Hillel. So one of them comes to Shammai. I'm not going to go through all three, but one of them comes to Shammai and he says, I'd like to convert to Judaism. Right. It's a subject we were talking about before. Shammai says, okay, sir, you need to learn about Judaism. So the man says, I don't have time for that. Teach me Judaism while I'm standing on one foot. Shammai kicks him out. Right? And he then goes to Hillel. And by the way, Shammai is correct. Halachically, he speaks from a religious Jewish perspective. You come to me, you want to convert to, I mean, seriously, I'm an American citizen. You can hear from my accent that I was not born in Brooklyn. I'm from Australia. So when I applied for citizenship in the United States, I had to do a civics test. And of course, I didn't tell the person, listen, just ask me one question. I don't have time to go. Don't you know, this allegiance, all that stuff. Just come on, let's go. I would have been thrown out. Right, I would now be in El Salvador probably. Okay. So actually, no, Trump was not president at the time. But anyway, so Shammai threw him out. He came to Hillel. I guess Hillel saw something in this guy that there was.
He saw deeper.
Yeah, Hillel said, "I can do that. I'll teach you the Torah on one foot." So Hillel said, very strange. He said, I'll quote the Aramaic. He said, "Mada alech sanei lechavrech lo tavid." That which is hateful to you, don't do unto your friend. Hadar perushahi, the rest is commentary. Zil Gmor, go and learn. So he says, that which is hateful to you, don't do unto your friend. I understand that's very important. That's the whole Torah. And then Hillel says something which a lot of people ignore the second half of the statement, right? Which is, the rest is commentary, go and learn. Now, how on earth is not eating lobster a commentary on that which is hateful to you, don't do unto your friend? I mean, unless your best friend is a salamander or a lobster, right? Famous song. But I mean, how does that work? So Rashi, already, here's one of the great commentaries on the Talmud, lived from 1040 to 1105 in France. Rav Shlomo Yitzhaki, Rashi says, friend, he says, doesn't only mean your fellow human. He says, God is also called our friend. Re'ah, re'acha v're'ah avicha, your friend and the friend of your father. We sing one of the most beautiful songs, Yedid Nefesh. Yedid means beloved of the soul. God is the beloved of the soul. So Rashi already says, when Hillel says, that which is hateful unto you, don't do unto your friend, by friend he means your fellow human and God. Rabbi Mordechai Becher, the Ramchal, who born in Padua in the 1700s in Italy, one of the great Kabbalist philosophers. Amazing. So
you see that the rabbi is a historian. You know,
I teach history.
It's amazing.
So Rabbi Mordechai Becher, he has one of his books, I mean, it's many books.
Mesilat Yesharim being the most...
That's the most famous. Mesilat Yesharim, Path of the Just, Derech Hashem. There are books that we don't have of his, but one of his books is the 138 openings into wisdom. And there he says that, you know what, you have another friend in addition to God, in addition to other people, which is your own soul. So if we put Rashi and Rabbi Mordechai Becher into Hillel's statement, what has Hillel said? You want to be a good Jew while standing on one foot? What does that mean? That which is hateful unto you, don't do unto your friend. Who's your friend? God, your fellow human being, and yourself. The rest, the whole Torah, Hillel's saying, is a commentary on that idea. The whole Torah is a commentary on that.
Beautiful.
Everything. So that's, I would think, it's a long answer to a short question.
But very powerful. Very powerful, Rabbi. Really enjoyed it. Why is it important, one might ask, to keep all the mitzvot? And on top of the question is, people might think, like, why is it so important, all the details of all the mitzvot? For example, Rabbi, you put on the right one, the right shoe, then you put on the left shoe, then you tie the left shoe, and then you tie the right shoe. Yeah.
Which technically is not a mitzvah, but nevertheless, right, it is common practice. But the question is a good question. You know, So, and you know, the Midrash asked this question. The Midrash, which is an ancient rabbinic text dating back to around the time of the Mishnah, there's 60 different collections, but I refer here to the Midrash Rabbah, which is the most famous of the Midrashim.
Right.
It says regarding the law of kosher slaughter, how to kill an animal in the correct kosher way. So there it says, why does God care if you slaughter the animal from the front of the neck by cutting the trachea, the esophagus, carotid, jugular, etc., or from the back of the neck through the spine?
So that has less pain for the animal.
That's not what the Midrash says. Interesting. That is a rationale that people give, but the Midrash's answer is, it says, lo nitnu ha-mitzvot ela l'tzaref bahen et habriot. The mitzvot were given not to benefit God, not because God is affected one way or the other, but in order to refine humanity. So you are correct. Yes, there's less pain for the animal that way. So that means if I do it, if I'm careful to do things in a way that causes less pain to a living creature, that makes me a better person. If I'm a better person, I'm closer and have a better relationship with God. So that's what it is. So what the Medrash is saying is, if you want to look for a rationale or a reason behind the commandments and the details, don't look for how it affects God, because it doesn't affect God. God was, is, will be, is eternal. My actions don't affect him, don't harm him, don't help him. Who is affected? I am, and the world is affected. So, and details are important. Details are important. Sometimes we don't always see how important they are, but as a famous architect once said, I don't remember the exact who he was, but apparently he was designing a museum, and in part of the plans that he submitted, there was also design for the cutlery and crockery in the museum cafeteria. And one of the members of the committee says, seriously? And he said, God is in the details. I want this to be one harmonious whole. You look at you order food in the museum cafeteria, the theme of the museum is reflected and now I agree with him, and I think the themes of Judaism are reflected in every action we do. The action affects the inner person. The actions are, it's mindfulness. Eating, it's supposed to be mindful. So I'm hungry. I walk along and say, Becher hungry, Becher eat. No, the first thing, Becher hungry, Becher decides, is this kosher, is this not kosher? I then decide, meat, milk. Have I eaten meat recently? Can I have milk? I then make another decision. What is the blessing on this? Right? In other words, what it does is it puts a little brake on instinct and says, whoa, slow down, man. Right? Let's think about things. So you mentioned putting on shoes. So you're right, it's not technically one of the commandments, but we put our right. Why do we give preference to the right? So generally we have in the Talmud and in Jewish mysticism, there is an idea that there are different ways in which God runs the world, modalities of God's interaction with the world that we call Sephirot. And the Sephirot are associated, they're arranged in such a way that they associated with different parts of the body and different aspects of history and different biblical characters. There's many, many layers of that. On a very simple level, the right side is generally associated with what we call chesed. Chesed is expansion, giving, kindness. The left side is associated with what's called gevura, contraction, holding back, judgment, strength. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, we might look at it like chesed, kindness, is the green light. But and without a green light, you're not going anywhere. But on the other hand, if it's always green lights, there'll be chaos.
Right.
Gevura, stopping, holding back, is obviously essential. Without it, there'd be chaos. But if there's only if there's only the holding back, stopping, no one's going anywhere. So an ideal parent, right, like myself, for example, but ideal parent will try to balance between, right, yeses and, and have a balance between giving and taking and so on and so forth. God does the same thing. But in our lives, if I'm, as a parent, as a spouse, as a teacher, as an employer, as an employee, which should be more important, ascendant, primary, kindness or holding back? Our answer is kindness. So as a reminder of that idea, we try to emphasize the right hand. Put on the right shoe first, right? Wash the right hand first. It's not, nothing's going to happen. You know what I mean? The hand's not going to wither away if I don't do that, right? I'm not going to trip on my shoelaces if I don't do that. That's nothing to do with that. It's not some type of magic.
Right.
It's very simply a way of reminding us that, when I go out I put my shoes on in the morning. It's one of the first things you do. Although I'm just pointing out to our listeners, first your socks, then your shoes. But nevertheless, I don't want to cause any accidents. But before we go out into life and walk around the world, I put on my shoe. One of the lessons I have to keep in mind, I put it on. Chesed, kindness, is first. Kindness is primary, right? So that's I think that would be an example, and that's just one example. I mean, one of the things I try to do in my book, Gateway to Judaism, that was a plug, is I try to explain the rationale, the reasoning, the ideas behind the various details of Jewish law that we fulfill. But they all have something behind them in that way.
To add to what the rabbi is saying, the tying to the left is because we tie the filin on the left side, so you get chashivut to the left.
Right.
That's why the left comes first, and the right.
And it's interesting. You mentioned that we put on tefillin and we tie it on the left hand. So in other words, that's a similar lesson. We are restraining the restraint, so to speak. The left hand, which indicates strength, which indicates the idea of holding back, pushing away, so to speak. That's also tied up with the tying tefillin on it is a way of saying that the power of distancing and the power of saying no, etc., should be inherently tied up only with the performance of holiness and mitzvot.
Beautiful.
Right. So there was Rav Moshe Feinstein. No, it was not. I believe it's said in the name of the Chazon Ish of Avram Yishaya Karelitz, 1950s B'nai Brak, who said that you only have the right to punish your child if you're doing it for their benefit. If any time you are punishing the child because you're in a bad mood or because you're angry, frustrated, or upset, he says that's basically an offense against another human being. Right? Your rights over the child are completely proportional to the degree to which you are fulfilling your obligations towards the child. So the left hand of perhaps din, of judgment and so on, has to be tied in to kedusha, to holiness, to mitzvot.
Wow, very, very, very powerful. Rabbi Mordechai Becher, love it very, very, very much. And I want to give a real plug to the book, Gateway to Judaism, available in all local Judaica stores, at least I hope. And
Amazon.
Amazon online. And all that you're hearing of here is based out of the book, Rabbi, more or less?
A lot of it. I mean, I do lectures and, feel free to try to book me if you would like. Contact me.
Rabbi travels around the world.
Yeah, I do.
You heard earlier.
So you can contact me via Chazaq.
Yeah.
But also, I have a website which is going to go live soon.
Nice. What is it?
It's rabbibecher.com.
Becher, Becher.
.com, C-O-M. Very easy to remember, rabbibecher.com, and that will have all the information, a lot of lectures and ways to contact me, and the book, and I've got 320 or so lectures on Torah Anytime.
Nice. I have this Torah talk will be on Torah Anytime.
I have a few hundred on YU Torah.
Nice.
I have a bunch on Simple to Remember.
Oh, wow.
So
it's
all free except for the book.
Baruch Hashem. I want to add something. The rabbi mentioned the website .com. We were talking about the details before, and a person forgets the dot in the email, or it's not going to go through. So the details can be very important.
Absolutely.
We see. So, Rabbi, we have a minhag, we have a custom, and Chazaq Torah Talks is one final message for our broad audience. Everything you've said so far are gems, and we appreciate it and love it very much.
It's hard to give one final message. But something I've been thinking about recently is something which is, I was asked by a good friend what I think is missing in 21st century society that was something that people may have had in the times of our parents, grandparents, etc.
Interesting question.
Yeah. And I think I came up with a few ideas, but one of them, I think, is the concept of dignity, kavod. Dignity, honor, is so central to Judaism. The sense of self-respect, dignity, is one of the most central ideas. My teacher, Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, said that he heard from his father, who heard from the Rosh Hashiva of Telz in Europe, that if you could take away from a person every shred of dignity, of kavod, they'd either go insane or die.
Well,
how essential it is. The Reb Zrachia Halevi, who was a sage from Lunel in Provence, so he wrote a commentary on the Talmud. It's called the Ma'or HaKatan, the small light, which is of course Hebrew for Lunel, which is where it came from. But he begins his commentary with the following statement. He says, "Baharbe makomot b'mikra," in many places in the written Torah, prophets, and writings, hanefesh nikreit kavod, the soul is called kavod, honor. It's one of the names of the soul is honor. And he explains, as does Rabbi Becher, that is because the human being, the soul, has its origins in, so to speak, the divine throne. So we have a sense of dignity. And that is one of the greatest barriers against sin, is that this is beneath me. It's beneath me. I'm not an expert in TikTok or YouTube, thank God. But based on what I've seen, I don't think anything dignified ever goes viral. It's highly unlikely. Anything going viral is probably the antithesis of dignity. People dress in a way that has no sense of personal dignity. They'll just, I feel like, I don't even want to mention, right? But just insanity, in a sense of, they don't understand the idea of human kavod. People will act in such a way that and I think one of the central lessons that at least Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, and this is from what they call the School of Slobodka, one of the three great schools of ethics based on the teachings of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter from Lithuania, 19th century. Yes. So there were, one school was Novardok that emphasized the humility and lowliness of the human being. Right. There was Kelm, which emphasized equanimity and calm. Slobodka focused on the greatness of the human being. The people have to realize that our potential is almost infinite. We have the power of free will. We have the power to change ourselves and through that the world. We have the power to come close to God. The human being is so incredibly great and powerful. And that should be something central that we need to, at least I feel, that we should think of. There's a verse that actually is describing humans, the verse in Psalms, Vatachasrehu ma'at me'elokim, he is a little less than God. V'kavod v'hadar ta'atrehu, adorned with glory and honor. That's the human being. If we could live up to that, the world would be a better place. But that's certainly, I think, central to Torah. And that was one of the teachings of Slobodka, which actually created many, many great Jewish leaders, maybe more than any other issue. I don't know, haven't done a statistical analysis, but it had a tremendous impact. And part of that was the encouragement of people's understanding of the greatness of the self, not to be arrogant.
Right. Because we always learned that kavod, honor, like, is something you should be shy away from.
Well, yeah. So again, the Mishnah tells us, Ezu mechubad, who is honored, hamachabed, one who can bestow honor upon others. But if you can bestow honor and dignity upon others, that means within you there is a sense of honor, of what is true respect and dignity and honor, which doesn't create arrogance, but it creates a way of behaving that is somewhat a barrier against sin, against doing the wrong thing.
Meaning the person holds themselves at such a high level. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm so high. How can I do an aver? How can I do a sin?
Yeah, this is beneath me. In the same way as I don't know, an adult would not behave like a 5-year-old.
Right.
It's beneath their dignity. It's beneath their dignity. It doesn't mean I'm arrogant.
So you're saying the olden days they had more of
hard to know, but that's my impression from people that I have met right, from previous generation ago, 2 generations ago, there was a greater feeling of that, of that idea that I have a purpose, I have a certain innate importance, dignity.
So how does one build that sense of more dignity?
There are texts in Jewish tradition that focus on that. One of them is by the Alter of Slobodka, actually, who Rav Finkel. It's called Gadlut. Yeah, Gadlut Ha'adam, the greatness of the person. And when you read classic works, like you mentioned Mesilas Yesharim, Derech Hashem, these works emphasize that, and they do talk about that. I think that's and part of halacha is also emphasizing that. When you observe Jewish law, a lot of that also helps to give you a sense of dignity, right? That there's things that I won't eat. A religious Jew, that most food that's out there will not eat.
Right. It's not kosher.
I don't have to. I'm walking past the cafeteria. I am able to say no. That's part of that. That's dignity. That's self-control. Right. Right. Shabbat. Every Jew on Shabbat, right? We stop working. Right. We dress regally. We dress we act regally. We don't run. We walk. I don't have to get involved in traffic and parking, and we live right. Every seventh day we become royalty. Shabbat teaches us how to. That's what we are. That. In other words, Shabbat is who I really am. The rest of the week, it's not the real me. Someone once asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They said during the 10 days of repentance between Rosh Hashanah and the Day of Atonement and Yom Kippur, there are customs to be stringent in certain areas. So someone said to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he says, I feel like I'm masquerading during that time. Like, who am I fooling? That's not right. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says, on the contrary, he says, the real you is the guy who's doing all of that special stuff during the 10 days of repentance. The fake you, the masquerade, that's the rest of the year. A beautiful way of looking at a classic Lubavitcher Rebbe.
When people say to change from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, there was another saying that you should change from Yom Kippur to Rosh Hashanah, not 10 days. But
that's correct. but the idea, I think Shabbat is that's the real me.
Beautiful.
It's a real me.
There's nothing like Shabbat. I always tell people.
Right. And that's a great way of creating that sense of dignity and royalty, really. Now, noblesse oblige, excuse my pronunciation of the French, but nobility obligates. Right. So if I am noble, I'm obligated. That's a good thing.
It is a good thing. Wow, interesting. Very interesting. So that's the school of thought for Slobodka, to have kavod habriyut.
Yeah, and my Rebbe Moshe Shapiro was from that school, and that's hence.
Sorry.
That's a good way, I think, of ending.
Mordechai Becher, Shlita, powerful Torah talk. Gateway to Judaism, the what, how, and why of Jewish life. We went through it all. I loved every moment of it. I'm sure you did as well. Please make sure to share and forward this amazing Torah talk with all your family, friends, and neighbors. We want to thank the Rabbi once again for coming.
Thank you.
Chazaq, giving us chizuk and inspiration. Special thanks to the various different platforms that host Chazaq Torah Talks. With a shout out once again to our friends at Torah Anytime. Also, a special thank you to our friends at Daily Giving. $1 a day goes a very far way. I just spoke to Dr. Donut yesterday with coming up with ideas to take it to the next level. So if you're not a daily giver yet, we encourage you to be part of it. And thank you to the entire Chazaq team and staff, Nathan behind the camera and the entire office over here, working in Manvaladi day and night, changing the world, making the world a better place. We want to do a lot more, and nobody could do everything. Everybody could do something. So please get involved. And reach out to us, info@chazaq.org, info@chazaq.org. And Bezat Shem, we shall hear Besarat Tovat, only good news.
Amen. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.